My name is Alisa. I am a consultant with LSAT Unplugged. A little bit about me. I was a long-term Facebook lurker on the Facebook groups, also a very avid podcast listener on Spotify. I became a member of the course and eventually I became a TA. And I was actually one of the first TAs. Myself, Ayaka, Elena, and Gabby kind of spearheaded the TA program, which is fantastic. If you don't know about the TA program, it's a really wonderful way for top performers or maybe someone who's looking to become a top performer for their law school admissions test to take deeper dives into the content and the material. It's every single time I get a chance to teach something or explore something with the rest of the course members, it only strengthens my relationship with that content and with that material. So the TA program has been a really big blessing, and I'm really grateful for that. One way that I got into essays is it's actually the way I found Steve and the way I entered the course. Anna's just put the links for class up in the chat right now. And if anybody has any questions or wants those links, go ahead and reach out and Anna will be so awesome and just go ahead and put up those links of what I'll be talking about today. I actually got into essays because to take it back up in a moment, I was a year ago, I was a self-studier. I had a lot of LSAT books. I had a few pieces of material, and I was doing everything completely alone, and I was doing fine. I wasn't doing great, but it was fine. I would say fine, and I had these long-term goals of just accomplishing everything on my own. And it wasn't until Steve posted a really rare opportunity on the Facebook page, providing he was going to give us like a free public essay feedback workshop. And that's when it sort of hit me that I didn't really know what I was doing when it came to my essays. I am a little bit of an older applicant. I'm not what some people, I've heard it's like sort of trendy. I'm not what some people would call a K through JD member. I've actually been out of undergrad for almost a decade, not quite a decade, but closer to a decade than not. So when it came to writing my essay, my line of work, I'm not used to writing essays. And that's when I realized that I really needed help. It was when I attended this essay workshop with Steve almost nearly a year ago. I received a lot of great feedback, both positive and constructive. And it was so helpful that I had this sort of aha moment that my law school application was never going to reach its full potential if I didn't ask for help. And with that being said, I really needed to ask for help on my essays. And that's when I joined the course. I became a TA. It's been really fantastic. And now I'm a consultant. And basically, I'd say the biggest difference between being a consultant and a TA is that anybody listening to this recording or anybody in the class right now, you have a direct line of access to both myself and Ayaka. If you're listening to this, if you're in the course and you're looking for more help or you're looking for more of a lift, you can go ahead and shoot us an email at admissions@lsatunplugged.com. And we're going to try to help you as much as possible, I'd say. So during this next class, I'm happy to answer any questions, any sort of engagement. Please share any of your personal things going on with your essays or applications, and I'll try to do my absolute best. I think that that's all I have to say about that, and I'm happy to take questions. I was going to say that sort of the work that Ayaka and I have been doing together, the way that we really got into this and becoming consultants was we realized that we were stronger together. We had formed a study group to complement the coursework. We thought that when we could get together and actually hash out what we were talking about in Steve's classes in the course, we were really just sort of gaining momentum in terms of our understanding and our feeling of ownership over our law school application journey. And we had been building this relationship with one another. And I like to say it was like a kind of a both. We were challenging one another and also largely supporting one another. And through sort of this like beautiful marriage of like challenge and support and conversation, we ended up trading essays. We ended up trading personal statements. And when we really sat down with one another and spoke about structure and content and ways to make our essays stronger, it sort of created a domino effect of obsession, a really happy obsession. And Ayaka and I sort of became obsessed with trying to find out and doing the research on what makes a strong essay and how to help others also have strong essays. This class is also hugely inspired by Elena's interview with Dean Mercado last Sunday night. Dean Mercado of UC Davis. It was a fantastic interview, lots of nuggets of information in there that I was thrilled. I was texting Ayaka after saying, you have to listen to this. It's really fantastic. So if anybody hasn't had a chance to catch Elena's interview with Dean Mercado of UC Davis from this past Sunday night, I highly recommend. It's such a blessing, I think, to get to hear from a dean of admissions and from law school right now, currently happening. I think it's so amazing to have those resources. So I'm going to go ahead and share the topic of the night, which is how to choose a topic. Something I think that's really cool that Ayaka and I've been working on is that over the next few weeks, we have actually structured, I think probably about like a 6-week cycle. So if you're curious about what's going on Wednesday nights, Ayaka and I are actually going to do our best to try to like hit on what we could come across during the essays. And I hope I'm not spoiling anything for you, Ayaka, but kind of wanted to give everyone like a sneak peek of what to expect when they're coming to these sessions. For example, tonight I'll be talking about choosing a topic, narrowing down what to write about. Next week, Ayaka might be talking about how to edit. She's super cool about that. Like, what do you do after you write your first draft? What are some questions that you can ask yourself once that first draft has been written? Or maybe questions that you could exchange with another study partner, study group would be a great place to start. After that, we'll talk about final drafts, how to know when your essay is done, how to create like kind of like a circle of different versions of editors, different people, different circles. I'm sure that everybody has that sort of like, my uncle's brother is a lawyer. I wonder if he would take a look at my essay. So we're going to talk about when do you fit him in? When do you fit in that random person that says, yeah, sure, I'll take a look at your essay? Because something I found along the way of becoming obsessed with essays is that all these things matter, and I want to share all of it with you. After that, we're going to, of course, we're always going to be doing essay feedback workshops. So please, sometimes you'll see the link. Feel free to go ahead and do that, or you can always send us an email as well. I'm going to try to share my screen here and get into it. While I go ahead and get this started for us, any questions, jump in the chat. I have the chat up, and I'm happy to answer anything at all. All right, so how to choose a personal statement topic. Let's see, can everyone see this? Is this all right? I think that I'm paused right now, which is to be expected. Just give me one more moment here. All right, just pulling my chat up to the front. Okay, great. So how to choose a personal statement topic. So I'm just going to go over some do's and don'ts. And I also wanted to let everyone know that I've purposely kind of gone against the rules here and what a presentation should look like. I'm under the knowledge that most of the time a presentation will have a few bullet points, and I'm supposed to be sharing verbally the meat, you could say, of the ideas and the content. But truth be told, I try to put a presentation together like that. And when I was looking at the more naked, you could say, bullet points, I just kept thinking, this stuff is too nuanced. And I keep hearing a lot of like lines get crossed. For example, somebody might talk about something that they've done in their job, and I've heard somebody else come through a workshop and say, well, wait a second, I thought we weren't supposed to put anything at all on our resume on the personal statement. And that's where it opens up sort of a conversation. So I tried to keep this really bare and naked, and I just couldn't. I'm like, morally, I was like, you know what, I know that this presentation gets shared through video. I know it gets shared in the course, the link. And when you open up this link, even months from now, I just don't want you to say, what did she say about that? I can't remember quite about that. So I just try to give it all to you, really. Okay, so that being said, lots of information. What your essay should not do. All right. So it should probably not speak mostly about someone or something else. And this is something that comes straight from Dean Mercado of UC Davis, kind of talking about this as a missed opportunity. It's completely fine. You could talk about your biggest inspiration, whether it's a role model, somebody else in your life that is a lawyer, even your relationship with your mother, if it's particularly profound. I think it's all a beautiful topic to talk about. And that's why I wanted to make sure to put in here. You absolutely can mention these things. You just don't want it to be the bulk of your essay that you're talking about someone else. And we'll kind of get to the reason of why that would be so in a few moments here. But essentially, if I were to sit down with a admissions officer or as somebody who works for admissions for a law school, and they asked me to talk about myself, and I spoke all about a mentor or spoke maybe a neighbor that of mine or a best friend from elementary school that experienced an injustice through the law system. Any of these topics definitely could be maybe an impetus, like a change for me to feel that call to action to become a lawyer. But if I spend my entire time talking about that other person's story, Dean Mercado, this is directly from her. She talked about as a missed opportunity to talk about yourself as the applicant. So I think that that's a great point to make. Also, my chat disappeared on me. Here. Okay, great. I got it. I got it back, kind of. But feel free to unmute yourself. Another thing your essay should probably not do is point to an injustice you once witnessed as the core message. Some people might say this happens a little bit more as Westerners or maybe like North American people. Maybe this is you took a trip and you didn't realize how underprivileged some people were until you saw them and it opened your eyes and you wanted to help them. Definitely, this can be something that makes you have that call to action. But I would advise that you wouldn't want to point to an injustice or something bad, or maybe the mistreatment of someone, especially if you didn't really do anything about it, or if you don't have the bulk of your story isn't maybe some action steps or some examples of you know what? It's really just coming off the top of my head right now, and it's sort of a risk, and anybody can come in and speak on it. But maybe I don't have to be a superhero to have a good essay. So I don't want this to scare anyone away. That if I witness maybe something horrific happen to a family member in the legal system, and I felt helpless, I don't think that I have to have like an action step of I did all this research and I found out their lawyer was incompetent. I got their lawyer switched for them and I understood the legal system, or I showed up in court. It doesn't have to be a sort of um, incredible action step that I took in order for that to be a stronger essay. I might even suggest that maybe you could say, I was helpless in that moment, but looking back and show a reflection and maybe use your imagination and say, if I could change maybe my steps then, I may have done XYZ. Maybe that could make it a stronger essay if you really want to go in there. But you just don't want to give a core message in terms of seeing something happen to someone else. And that's the only part of your essay that talks about, and it made me really sad and I want to be a lawyer now. So add in some action steps if you can, or add in a reflection back on it, or just make sure it ties back to you as the central message as your essay. Another thing you don't want your essay to do is paint a chip on your shoulder. And these are sort of two different things that I want to talk about. Something through Ayaka and I's obsession with essays, we have both seen over 100 essays. I have no doubt about it. And something that I have seen a trend in is maybe the writer has let negative experiences overshadow maybe their potential as an applicant. For example, say that you don't like your job and you're applying to law school because you want a better job. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no shame in that. In fact, that's incredible. And I want everyone to feel the freedom to do that and to apply to go and get their law school education. But if your essay talks too much about what your boss maybe did to you or why you don't like your coworkers, what that does is it sort of seeps through to the reader a lot of that chip on your shoulder. And moreover, I would suggest that actually overshadows your positive attributes. If you do spend too much time talking about maybe the way that your company has wronged you or your boss or anything or any sort of stressful events, negative events. I think that it might, maybe this is oversimplifying, but of course, there are going to be different kinds of applicants to law school. There will be people that are excited about the potential of getting a law school education. And there's going to be a lot of other people that say there was many events in their life that said, ow, or I don't like this. And I want to go and I want to go do something better for myself. That's totally fine. Don't let the ow overshadow what you do have to offer. And I have more to say about that as well, kind of later on in the presentation. But in the end, if the reader has learned more about the hardship or the stressor than what you can personally provide outside of that stressor, go back, find ways to promote yourself or your actions or how you responded to that stressor, and take away a lot of that chip on the shoulder. A little bit more on that. What your essay should not do: get stuck in a childhood timeline. I think this is really interesting, and another nuance that I didn't want to leave out is you can absolutely talk about something that happened in your childhood. It's not a completely off limits thing to do, but if you do feel that your story can best be told from something in childhood, try to connect it to who you are now. Um, it's a trend that I've seen where there's a lot of narration about maybe like a change in school or a change of scenery, and it's completely valid. But also, you are the applicant today that's applying right now. So if you can find something today that's relevant, it's just as powerful. I don't know if I'm going off on a limb here, but as a very empathetic person, a very sensitive person myself, I can imagine that maybe a childhood story feels more powerful. Maybe it's left more of an impression on me personally, and therefore I feel more comfortable or more compelled to tell it. And maybe I don't feel like there's something interesting enough to talk about in the last year. And that's completely valid. And we can kind of talk about that as well later on. Another thing your essay probably shouldn't do is use tons of jargon from your job. You're welcome to read this. I know Ayaka and I have talked about this before. You don't want to let your essay get bogged down with a lot of jargon from your job. Also, just geographically, I've taken a look. I've seen a few different essays where maybe there's these long titles of companies or projects, and just the sheer names of the projects alone that they've worked on takes up so much space. And I'm just interested to know a little bit more about the applicant themselves. So, or in another example, recently I came across someone whose job, they spoke in a very specific way. There is a specific cadence, specific language that they had to use in order to be good at their job. And the personal statement essay transitioned in and out of speaking to the reader and also just straight up using sentences in the same structure that they might at their job. And we spoke about it, that applicant and I did, and I, to me as a reader, it looked like they weren't aware of the fact that sometimes they were, it looked like they were at work as they were trying to talk to me as the reader. And they did bring back a really important question. They said, well, doesn't that just make me look really good at my job? Which brings us to the point of, don't I want to look like I am good at my job in my personal statement essay? Yes, of course. But if your personal statement essay is basically just you saying that you can do your job, that's not really a fantastic personal statement essay. You could talk about a challenge that was rare that came up in your workplace. You could talk about working in a group dynamic, or maybe working on a group project, or how you handle different personalities. You could talk about something that you find to be the most intriguing and interesting aspect of it. There's a lot of thoughtfulness that can come up in and around what's expected of you with your day-to-day responsibilities. But if you are sort of just trying to show off that you know what your day-to-day responsibilities are, it's not the strongest representation of you in terms of this. I'm going to go back to Dean Mercado's statement of an opportunity to show yourself in a more conversational, sort of real way, you could say. And the last thing I'm going to say that your essay probably should not do is badmouth lawyers. And of course, I could say, do I really have to say this? But it goes back to that chip on your shoulder, or sort of this attitude of like, I could do a better job than what I see. Ayaka is the one who pointed this out to me. Schools produce lawyers, so you probably don't want to go up to a school and uh, criticize who they're producing. These are some things of what your essay could do. And I hope you notice that this list is a lot less detailed. And that's because this list can actually just absolutely explode with the amount of possibilities that I personally feel each of these questions could bring up. So, something you might want your essay to do to the reader is answer a few of these questions. Are you interested in learning? Okay, I wanted to remind everyone that a law school education, you're not saying that you're ready to be a lawyer. You're saying that you're ready to learn how to be a lawyer. And that to me is this huge differentiation and what I see in terms of essays sort of trying to prove that point or trying to prove that they could do a better job or anything like that. And just explain, are you a good learner? Did you come across something that you wanted to learn more about? Um, Off the top of my head, I don't know anything about sports. I'm very bad at it. When I was younger, a ball came towards me and I ran. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, I decided I was going to learn how to play soccer. And I would go out into these abandoned fields and I just started learning how to play soccer completely alone. And maybe that could be a personal statement topic. Maybe it could show how creative I am. Maybe it could show how how much I'm willing to learn something new. There was at one point during the pandemic where a guy rode over on a lawnmower. He was like, "You want to know how to kick that? You're supposed to kick at an angle." I was like running at it head on. So you like talk about like how kind of like embarrassing that is. And he's like, like, what are you doing? So I bet it would be a really compelling essay. And it would show all about how interested in learning something new. You could ask yourself, how are you in a group dynamic? I know a lot of the times, or I've heard before, I'll be clear. I've gotten questions in terms of when we talk about promoting yourself or talking about your positive attributes. Some people have asked before, well, how do I come across as not being a jerk? Well, do you work well with others? You could absolutely paint a picture of how you are in a group dynamic. It could be in terms of maybe professionally, how you can relate to people who have different opinions than yours. It could be a hard decision you had to make at work. You could absolutely go into a decision like that. For example, I know for me, was trying to write an essay about sort of my success and my climb of becoming a professional tap dancer in Los Angeles and in San Francisco. And when I read through the essay, I immediately noted that nowhere in there does it say I necessarily like play well with others. And of course, in my mind, I personally know that I don't get choreograph. I don't A choreographer doesn't want to work with me if I'm a jerk. So I can't have that amount of credits and be a jerk. Word travels fast in the dance career world, and if you're not easy to work with, there's a lot of other people that are. And so I personally know that none of that can exist unless I'm easy to work with. But when I read my essay, I realized that they're not professional dancers. They don't necessarily know that. And so I did have to go back and kind of maybe give an example of the fact that word does travel fast and that there's a lot of other people. If I'm being quite honest, there's actually a lot more talented tap dancers in the world than me. I know I keep saying I've been a professional dancer. I'm not the best one. Okay. I'm just easy to work with. So maybe I could talk about that. You could ask yourself, are you thoughtful? Do you have more empathy than maybe an event required of you? Are you someone who's a thinker? A really well written essay is something about a subject that someone has thought a lot about and can talk about. You want to make sure that your essay is something that you could talk about over a cup of coffee casually. I could absolutely talk about my journey learning how to play soccer. I could absolutely talk to you about what it's like to work as a tap dancer in a group dynamic and try to balance that. So you always want to have those questions in the back of your head. And the last one is, how do you respond to stress? I read an essay where the person talked about this big stressor in their life, and it was a really beautifully written essay. And at the end of the essay, they had sort of concluded, I am no longer like that. And when I read it, I personally didn't necessarily believe them because they didn't tell me examples of maybe ways that that's come up next, or maybe actual tangible ways that they went to solve that. They kind of just said, I'm not like that anymore. So you want to make sure that you paint a picture that you respond, how you respond to stress. Law school is stressful. They want to make sure in a way that you are going to be a positive contribution to that community. So these are things that I could talk about all night. I feel that I need to keep going. I
Yeah.
don't see anything in the chat. Go ahead, Ayaka.
Um, I love this. I think, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head here with the do's and don'ts. Um, I get a lot of questions about the hook of an essay. And a lot of people are trying to make the beginning of their essay really interesting, really gutsy and all of that. I would love to hear your thoughts on how to approach the hook. What if you have any tips on how to start an essay in the very beginning?
That's a great question, Ayaka. And I think that something that's really interesting about the hook, or how to make a reader feel, I like to imagine, and through various podcasts that I listen to of Steve interviewing admissions officers, I've gotten the idea that admissions officers are always reading. They are reading so many essays. And so, of course, naturally, if I were writing, I might be inclined to write something that can grab the reader. That being said, I would almost say it's impossible to write the perfect hook the first time around. I've heard a few different applicants say, I have it all in my head, I just want to write it down. And what's really interesting about a hook is that it needs to be compelling, but it also needs to be relevant to the rest of what you write in an essay. And this really brings me to a really important part about how to narrow down what to write about, is that it's actually quite difficult to structurally do something very unique, to bring up a lot of different things, or to have a ton of nuance in the short amount of space that is a personal essay. So something that I've thought about before is, how do I stand out? How do I make my hook unique? How do I write about something that is very interesting? And my best answer for all of that is, number one, you really have to do it. And number two, maybe Ayaka, you could talk about that next week, and how to create your editor circle. If we think about it like a commercial, right? A really great commercial, or something that is really compelling. Maybe it's a radio or television commercial. There was the one years ago with the pig, like going wee out like the door with the window down, and I still think about that. And these commercials, or things that grab our attention, they've gone through layers and layers of people approving it. So many eyes have been on these ideas. I think it's very difficult to come up with a hook that only exists in my brain and it speaks and lands to many different readers. And that's another thing about how to know what to write about. And I'd love to keep talking about that in terms of like these questions and a hook, is that you want your essay to be readable to many different kinds of people. There's going to be a lot of different people that read your essay. So hopefully I answered a little bit of that, of like how to write a good hook.
Yeah, I love everything that you said, and I agree absolutely. And we come across people who say they have it all in their head, and what I find is that the thoughts are a lot more potent than the words that we can put on paper. Meaning, it takes a lot more words on paper to write what you're thinking. So sometimes it ends up that the hook is taking up half the page or even a full page. So love what you said. Thank you.
That's such a fantastic way to put it, and it's such a brilliant observation, that it is really hard to take something in my head, or take something I experienced, and package it in a very easy to digest way. And I really mean that, that it should be easily digestible. Good writing is not difficult to follow. Good writing is very easy to follow. And I think that in an essay, especially with an admissions officer that's reading and reading and reading, um, kind of having these general ideas in mind is great. So I did want to take a look, if everyone just looks at the slide that I'm on right now, of asking ourselves, are you interested in learning? Or how are you in a group dynamic? If we were to go back to what you shouldn't do, we can actually look at these really tangibly now and say that had an entire essay written about a mentor. You wouldn't really know how I am in a group, how I am in learning, or how I am in a group dynamic. I could actually write about a mentor and write about the way they taught me something. And I could maybe write about my maybe disagreements with them. And then you see how I'm actually pulling myself into the essay and showing you that. Sorry not to play tug of war here, but like, are you thoughtful? Do you have empathy? How do you respond to stress? If we look here and I'm bad mouthing lawyers, or I don't look like I'm able to respond to stress in a productive way. And that's when we want to kind of go back here. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward and say what your essay doesn't have to do. So your essay doesn't have to explicitly state why you want to go to law school. Uh, Again, your essay in law school, you are going to practice persuasive writing. You are going to practice how to write about a case briefings. I think I'm not in law school. Yeah. You're going to practice a lot of writing, and you have to take a lot of information and synthesize it and produce it in a really important way. But you don't have to explicitly make that case for yourself. You're not a lawyer yet. And so you don't have to prove that you necessarily have that skill set. Again, you have to prove that you have the personality or you have the experiences that are conducive to a law school education's environment. I just want to make sure that that lands really clearly. You're not a lawyer yet. You don't have to prove why you have to go to law, or you don't have to necessarily make a case for yourself of why you'd be a good lawyer, but you do have to prove that you have the personality or the skill sets or the experiences that would be valuable in a law school education's environment. So that can be anything about the thoughtfulness on listed on the slide before. Another thing your essay doesn't explicitly have to do is say the school's name or list one or two courses the school maybe provides in it. I would even go so far as to say that this is a risk. You are putting yourself at risk in a very high stress time. Law school applications is an extremely big stressor to some people. I won't put that weight on everyone. And it's also extremely valuable and important that you do not mess up the school's name. I've heard many times from admissions officers, it's absolutely not necessary. It's not going to necessarily make you a stronger candidate overall. Of course, a personal statement essay is one part of a very larger, bigger picture. So, you mentioning at the very end of your essay, one or two sentences saying, and that's why I want to go to XYZ school because you have the one course. What that really looks like is that you went on the website, and excuse me if I'm wrong. What it really looks like is that you went on the website and you picked out one course that looked interesting to you and you slapped it at the bottom of your essay, and that you're sort of thinking that that somehow pushes you to a top of a pile. When if a school really is your dream school and you're very much so interested in it, there are a lot of other ways to make that point. I'm happy to answer that question later on. You can always reach out to Ayaka and I. You can always email us or ask us questions here about how to make that point a little bit stronger. But it's such a big risk, and slapping it on at the bottom of your essay, I would even beg to offer, it actually distracts from who you are or the actual overall theme of your essay. There are ways to do it. Absolutely. I don't want to discourage anyone from doing it, but if you don't have to, it's definitely an important choice that you need to make, and a little bit more of a thoughtful choice than I see. I see actually someone's raised their hand. Go ahead.
Hey, Jocelyn here. So I had a question about that. So in my personal statement, I do like mention, or I actually have a paragraph where I address each school. And I understand that, like you said, it is risky, but I'm looking at these courses and I'm kind of explaining to them of how it like fits in with what I'm looking to do. Is that acceptable, or is that still too much of a risk to take? And then I guess the second part of my question is, how do you know like what are the indicators I guess you should look for that would suggest, hey, you do not absolutely need to include the name of this course or whatever. Like, how do you eh, like what are the key indicators for that?
Such a great question, Jocelyn. And I know that Ayaka can jump in here too. Right off the bat, Jocelyn, you and I have had multiple conversations about how to integrate things that one of us is interested in and how to take it a step farther. So, anybody listening in, just know that I already know that about Jocelyn and that she sort of is the sort of like the extra mile kind of person. So, by you explaining to me that you have like many maybe paragraphs, not only listing the course's name, but maybe stating why you're excited about it. And I know we've gone a step farther and said that you might even suggest what you could potentially contribute to it. And if anyone's cringing, saying, how could I ever have that sort of hubris to think that I could contribute to school? You are going to contribute to school. You are going to school to contribute to their programs. So it's, of course, execution is everything. But Jocelyn, for you specifically, I do know that you are going the extra mile for that. And in order to just answer your next question, in terms of how to know when it's not worth the risk, I would say it's incredibly difficult and strenuous to do that sort of deep dive for many schools. I would say anywhere, even just above 3 schools of doing that sort of deep dive in would be incredibly strenuous. If you're truly excited in the work, then absolutely go for it. I don't think that there's a hard stop. It's for me, if I'm reading an essay and I personally see maybe an entire thing about like someone's personal experience, and then in the closing paragraph, they say, and that's why I want to take this one class. That to me is not powerful, but your deep dive sounds very powerful.
Yeah, and just to hop in here, I think, Jocelyn, we know each other. I also know that you're not going to just slap on a course name at the end. But I think it's very common to see people say, I want to like be on your beautiful campus and attend this course and blah blah. And it's almost like you swallowed a brochure and you don't need to regurgitate information about the school that the admissions, to be honest, already knows about their own school. So Jocelyn, I'm not saying that you're doing that. I think, saying what you could contribute to a certain course or a certain work that the school is doing, I think that's the right way to take it. The wrong way to take it would be to say, you're super excited about a certain course because, but yeah, Alyssa, I think you're spot on.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and make sure my internet is working here. And again, your essay can do this. And this slide is titled "But Your Essay Doesn't Have to Do This." So again, just kind of rerouting to the beginning of the course and stating that all of this is so incredibly nuanced. It's one of the reasons why there's so much text on my presentation to begin with, because there's some do's and don'ts, but this particular slide is you can do this, but you don't have to. I see Shakira's hand raised. Go ahead.
Also just a question pertaining to that. Would it be just knowing the communities that the law schools might serve, mentioning that and how like as you being a student thinking about internships in the area, would that do you think carry more weight versus like the courses the school just offers?
Of course, as a pre-lawyer, I always want to give a qualifier and say it depends. But truthfully, yes, I do feel like even your knowledge of the surrounding communities of the law school is completely valuable. It's very highly valuable. It's showcasing that you have done the research in terms of that specific school. It's showcasing almost like a mastery of choosing that school, and it's very purposeful. And I think it does something really great, which is I heard with Dean Schwartz, he's the dean of UCLA Law School admissions, and one of the interviews that he does with Steve, he spoke about he's actually seen the transition to like online applications versus like many years ago when it was paper applications. One of the trends that he's noticed is that people can apply to a lot more schools now. And Shakira, what you bring up of talking about the communities they service and the sorts of internships that are available to you should you choose that school, I think it does show more of a mastery of exactly why that school, which does to me pull ahead in terms of that trend that even Dean Schwartz has talked about, where you're applying to a lot of different schools. It's a fantastic question. Definitely more than going on the website and saying, I wanted to go this one class or one course. And she gave me a thumbs up for anyone that can't see. I see the thumbs up on her video, so that's why I'm moving on. So another thing that your essay doesn't have to do is be about something really intense. Again, I mentioned that my learning how to play soccer, I really meant that. I think it would be a great personal statement essay. It always depends on execution. It doesn't have to be about the most intense thing in your life. Even if you do have a very intense thing, you're absolutely welcome to not tell that story. It's not something that you have to do. It does have to be personal, but to me, learning how to play soccer is personal, or it can be about something more intense. So I wanted to make sure to get that message across as well. And this kind of brings me to something that I have seen come up. Kind of a frequently asked question is when to talk about something intense, maybe a sensitive subject or a traumatic event. This can fall under many different types of physical abuse, mental abuse, sexual assault, any sort of PTSD issues. And so I do want to go ahead and do, there is a content trigger warning that I won't be talking in depth about any of those things, but just so anyone can be prepared. But some very, very concise do's and don'ts about that I've picked up along the way is do be clear. If you're wanting to talk about something that you would feel uncomfortable speaking casually with someone about, or that maybe potentially could make you so emotional that in a professional setting you would not be able to speak about it, I would advise you not to write about it. Your personal statement should be something, and Ayaka puts it so wonderful, that it is a sort of interview in terms of they're just trying to get to know you. And also, if you do harp so much on the maybe something negative that's happened to you, I wanted to point out it still is overshadowing the what you can contribute. Also, do focus on what happened after. Did your views change? What did you do? How did it change you as a person? What are some actions that you now take as a result? There's different ways to talk about that, but to also still highlight yourself. Some things not to do if you are going to talk about a sensitive subject is don't be too graphic. One of the things that I like to bring up is that a personal statement is only a few pages long, and whatever that person is reading, they are completely prepared to believe what you say. They're not suspicious of you. I come across some writers who feel that they need to drive a point because they really want the reader to, maybe they want to take them to the place that they were at. Maybe it's physically, emotionally, or mentally. If you tell us once what happened, they absolutely remember because it's only 2 pages long. So you don't have to rehash that out. So you don't have to be too graphic. And also don't be vague. So if you say something bad happened, that's really not the greatest way to go. You're kind of creating a lot of questions for the reader, which also brings up the point that whatever topic that you do write about, and again, Ayaka will go about, we're talking about editing next week. There's so much to talk about. Whatever topic that you do choose to write about, you want to make sure that you can talk about it clearly and that you can also talk about maybe ways that you've moved on from it. So this is absolutely 100% what your essay should do. The essay should get the reader excited about you joining their community. That is the biggest ticket. It doesn't explicitly say why law. It doesn't necessarily have to talk about why the school. It can talk about the school. It doesn't have to be something intense. It can be about something intense. It can be about something traumatic or sensitive. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to necessarily be about anything specific. There's many different ways that you could go about it, but no matter what, once the reader has put your essay down, they should be excited about you joining their community. That can come up in a lot of different ways. The reader and the admissions officers might think to themselves, what are you like in a study group? They know that classmates have to work together. Study groups are very important. You need to be a great team player. How are you in that group dynamic? What hole maybe do you fit into in terms of what you're going to bring to those classes? And that brings me to what will you be like to have in class? If your whole essay talks about your boss and why you don't like the way that they run the company, I'm not really getting a great idea of, okay, this person's going to be great to have in my classroom. And also, how are you going to contribute to their metrics? And this is something I always like to bring up, that at the end of the day, a law school is looking for, are you resilient? How do you respond to stress? Will you make it through their program? Of course, they don't want to admit someone into their program that might be showing signs that maybe they would switch out of school if they became too stressed out, or maybe create those metrics for them. Of course, they need to worry about that so they could protect their school in a good way. Also, I did come across an essay once where someone had written about academia and how academics used to stress them out and they wanted to be perfect, and that they're no longer worried about getting perfect grades. And this person was applying to all T14 schools. And to me, there's a big gapping hole there that needs to be addressed, where in some way, shape, or form, if you're applying to those schools, you probably don't want to say in your essay that you don't care about grades at all anymore, and that you've adopted this like complete, I'm sure that it could be reworded in a way where if you're applying to a T14 school, you might not want to say that, if that makes sense. You do want to have a perspective on how does this shape their metrics. And this is my meme of the day. Sorry, it's blurry. Grabbed it from the internet. But this is writing about what you think a law school wants to hear versus writing about something that really interests you. And again, I really recommend that everyone go and listen to Elena's interview from Sunday night with Dean Mercado of UC Davis. She paints examples of this so beautifully. I won't even try to quote her, but it's a really great topic. Something that you also want to think about is, what can I write a few hundred words about that excites me, that is so interesting to me? And a personal example is I'm going to go ahead and kind of do one last thing here tonight with you all, is I want to show everyone how my personal statement topic shifted along various drafts and through conversations. And it will be the second link that Anna went ahead and put on the chat, but I just put it in the chat again. And I'm going to go ahead and screen share here. Okay, everyone. So this is my first kind of list that I ever found. I found this from March 2019. That's 2 years ago, embarrassingly enough. So my first thoughts on what to write about, I had this big old list. It says Crystal Pite's work. She's a well-known choreographer from Canada. Intake of creative information creatively, spent years training the Gaga movement language. And then I have a whole bunch of just cities just randomly listed out. I don't remember what I was thinking at all, but I'm just going to go ahead and say here. So also, Steve has suggested maybe you could write down 8 major events in your life. What are 8 big things that pop out to you? I often find that sometimes, again, that kind of gets stuck in the childhood narrative. So I would go back on the Google slide doc and ask yourself, there's actually a slide on there that I didn't show. It's the very last slide after the Oprah meme of places to start. And it's just asking yourself some questions. You can find it on the Google slide, but there is a series of questions that you can ask yourself to get yourself started. So if I were to look at this list here, I could talk about in Tel Aviv, Israel, and I see a few different people on the screen with me. So hopefully you can see that I'm writing. So in Tel Aviv, Israel, what happened? I wanted to be a part of a program. They wouldn't let me in. I would explain who they is. So I decided to spend months there training by myself. I didn't know anyone there. I was completely alone. I kept asking for interviews and information. Finally, I grabbed an email address of the right person. I sent them my info. I got in to be trained. I got into this program to be trained, and then I turned it down. So that's what happened in Tel Aviv. Another thing, a big thing that happened to me in Austin is financial abuse of artists. I didn't find out, I'm not capitalizing my eyes, sorry, excuse me. I didn't find out about it until after I had accepted the job. After it happened to me, I found a lot of different artists, and we created resources for each other, and I spoke on some podcasts to raise awareness about it. And also we are in the works of like leading workshops so that this doesn't happen to other artists. And this is all during the pandemic. This is all very recent. Or I could talk about Phoenix, where me and a group of friends kind of like started a brand to teach dance to like diverse, like talented, youthful people. And I like created a new way to teach and learn, and like codified like a way to like basically the insider way of like how you could like retain and like personalize choreography. I apologize if there's a lot of jargon there. So these are just like random things that came to my mind. I'm just talking about what happened. So all these things, I just want to say this all seems pretty cool. And what I actually ended up writing about is a lot of childhood stressors. And I feel like this happens to a lot of people. So here I am up here, and I'm saying like all these really interesting, unique things that I've experienced. And then I see down below what actually happened on my first draft. So I wanted to share about that and actually share with you all of how a topic can shift throughout a few drafts. I only have a few minutes here, so I'll do my best. Jocelyn says, if I went with the Austin idea, would you link the podcasts in the essay, hypothetically speaking? Yeah, if the entire essay, if the podcasts were really strong, I mean, I wouldn't suggest this to really anyone, actually. Like that's a really big stylistic risk. I would make sure that I was a really good writer, and I would do that by following what Ayaka says in the editing session next week. And I would run it by a lot of different people and try to get the temperature of how that lands. Also, with an essay linking podcasts, I would ask myself, like, how logistically does that create more work for the reader? Because I don't want to put more work on them. But yeah, definitely consider it, Jocelyn. That was a really cool idea.
I suggest linking it in your resume.
That's a fantastic idea, Ayaka, linking it in my resume. Also, I do want to just like, for that specific example, it was sort of like a group chat. There was like 4 of us talking. So maybe I could, I don't know, grab like sound bites, but I don't know. There's just tons to talk about. Okay, so moving on, just like what happened in my first draft. I talked about childhood stressors, the decision to become, these are like the outline of what was going on in that essay, just so everyone knows. The decision to become a professional dancer. And then I stayed in like childhood and talked about like adult barriers, what I did. In the next part of my essay, I actually reintroduced these stressors in my teenage years and like juxtaposed it with success. I talked about being queer, I'm gay and Latin, my Latinx origin, and that actually was pulled out to be another essay over here. So that actually ended up being a completely other essay. I talked about like a career high point, and then I tried to talk about the stressors again. And in the conclusion, it was that dance wasn't the end goal. So in red, I just want to point out like everything I was speaking about that was a very big negative impact on my life. And I try to talk about good things like every once in a while. And I said here what I was trying to do was to show the amount of bad in my life in order to like highlight the good. Like, look what I can get done when these like terrible things happen. And what I realized that what this actually does is it pretty much like shoves aside actually what I am capable of and what I am working on. And it just highlights the bad things that happen. So what I did in my second draft is I actually kept the childhood stressors, and I try to fix like a different thing. So you can see here I'm trying to bring in like influences, many examples of what I did, a few different moments, but no explanation. So I started to talk about maybe a few more moments that were interesting to me in my overall career. Again, I'm not a K through JD. I've been out of undergraduate for quite a while now, so I am talking in the most of my essay. I'm talking about now, which is a lot of my career. But I still wanted to juxtapose it with the biggest stressor that like ever happened to me. And you can see in my first draft conclusion, I'm going backwards over here. I said, I made this conclusion that dance wasn't the end goal for me. Dance was just a vessel for me to gain a lot of discipline and skill set that I can translate. My second draft conclusion, I'm starting to shift the topic from completely being about all of my stressful moments in life that I'm trying to kind of talk about, like, okay, I've survived through this suffering and achievement, and I can't ignore the call. And I sort of really like just get like marbled up, like in marbles in my mouth. I don't really know what I'm trying to say. And that's what's brought me to the third draft. And what ended up happening with me is you can see here that I actually changed my hook, which Ayaka didn't even know I was going to do this when she talked about the hook. You can see in my first two drafts, I started out with this like childhood negative memories and what happened in my childhood. And I realized that I just don't have time for that necessarily. So the way I ended up starting this third draft is I talked about a decision I made after a really stressful event. So this is what I'm talking about, that I was able to still mention that this happened, but I really kind of take off. I imagine it like an airplane, take off and make it kind of more about me. I do have barriers, but the barriers exist so that you can see the way I responded to those barriers. I talk about, sorry, I skipped around, steps that I took to reach that goal, barriers, and I talk about where that took me and most rewarding moments. At the beginning stages of when I first started writing, I wasn't actually ready to talk about a lot of like the good things in my life or rewarding things. I just wasn't emotionally ready, I guess. So if you are trying to talk about maybe a stressful thing, I would advise to give yourself a lot of time. And that if you still have a chip on your shoulder, it might be coming through. Again, this is a very specific example to me. I really do want to write that essay about learning how to play soccer. And then another thing that I did is instead of writing strictly about the stressors, I talk about reflecting on how I've built some of this skill set is because of maybe some of those stressors. But again, I'm talking about skill sets that are bringing me to rewarding places. And maybe I'm bringing that something up that led to that, but I'm sort of showing a thoughtfulness about where I am today. And the conclusion is reflecting about what's most interesting about what I do. So it shows that I'm very interested in different aspects of what I can do. And then you can see how something from the first essay gets pulled out into another essay. So I did want to talk about how topics can shift and how, technically speaking, this is 3 drafts of the same essay. And I decided to write about one thing and how that one thing can actually sort of stay the same, but be a little bit more productive. Great. Looks like we're at the top of the hour and we've had some really great questions. Thanks, Ayaka. And again, next week, Ayaka will be talking about editing circles and kind of what to do after you've written that first draft and maybe talk about how to shift those topics. And I hope everyone also saw that really random list that I made in 2019. It seems like even Jocelyn pulled out even a list that I made 2 years ago, it looked like there was probably many different essays there. Lots of things to write about, but make sure you stay on a topic that you're actually interested in or that's exciting to talk about. And I'll leave space for any questions. And if not, you can email Ayaka and I at admissions@lsatunplugged.com. And I'm really grateful for your time, and I hope everyone has a great night.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.